This is a crooked sidewalk, a slanted sidewalk. People are having a rough time. It leans. And we're on our way to the Charleston City Market. It's building after building after building of crafts, food, party, hardy. I know it's bumpy, bumpy, bumpy. I gotta get on the smooth road. Like a super highway. And it's drizzling lightly. It's a little cool. But we're in Charleston, South Carolina. It is April 19th. Somebody's birthday. It's a noisy oyster. Guess we got to cross this. How are we supposed to get in that building? I think we're going to have lunch there, Gene. Noisy oyster. We are actually inside the Charleston City Market, and it's several buildings long. So we'll just take glimpses of some of the things that are for sale, and a lot to see and do. And I won't have to buy the shirt. I can just take it home on film. Wow. People are scurrying for everything. And it says go through this building, go through the next building, and 2 more buildings after that.
Everywhere.
Just lots and lots and lots. It's like a big old warehouse. There's where we came from. Hopefully I wasn't going too fast. This lady is in her glory. Shopping, shopping, shopping.
As Rag Borough. The Rag family owns this area, and the Rag family were very wealthy rice planters. Y'all went to a cotton plantation today, but you did learn some stuff about the Gullah culture here. The Gullah culture is more closely aligned with the rice culture here in South Carolina. This was the only place in the British colonies that rice was grown, was along the coast here of South Carolina. And the technology of growing the rice came from Africa with the slaves that were brought here. Take a left-hand turn here onto King Street. Notice this restaurant on the corner here on the right. It says Thai cuisine right next to it. Look up at the top. What do you see on the top? There's a bicycle. That was Robinson's bicycle shop for a long time. In fact, I got my first bicycle there. Most kids I know did. And what has happened in Charleston is many of these old establishments have been converted to new types of establishments these days. This is known as the Upper King Street area. And within the last 15 or so years, this area has been completely transformed. There were a lot of rundown buildings at one time, very much crime-ridden area, just not a whole lot of good stuff going on here. But our mayor decided that by putting the visitor center up in this area, maybe that would work. Maybe that would revitalize this area. And guess what? It worked. Because the visitor center is just around the corner. Now you'll see the American Theater over here on the left-hand side. American Theater, of course, dating back to the early 20th century when small theaters were big attractions. You may have actually seen this particular stretch of King Street if you've seen the movie The Notebook. That was filmed here, and this particular street was used in the filming of that. Anybody see that movie?
Yeah.
Well, Boone Hall was also used in it, and if you recall the young girl, in the movie, her parents did not approve of the romance that she had with this young boy. And the exterior of the parents' house was Boone Hall Plantation, Boone Hall's house. And y'all know from being over there that that house at Boone Hall is not original to the plantation. That house was from the early part of the 20th century. But as I say, this whole area has really just had this huge transformation occur within the last 2 decades or so. Now, when I was small, which was much longer than 2 decades ago, but anyway, when I was small, I could remember shopping here at Chase Furniture on the left. Notice now it's the Charleston School of Law. So you see some old signs and some new signs, both on the same building. St. Matthew's Church is on the right. The old library is on the left-hand side. Stay straight in this lane, and we're going to turn right at the traffic light, Chuck. There's John C. Calhoun's statue again on the left. By the way, that park was the original drilling field for the Citadel when it was over here. And today it is known as Marion Square. It used to be called the Citadel Green, but it's known as Marion Square. The hotel on the right-hand side is the Francis Marion Hotel. And again, any of you educators who taught history may be familiar with the name Francis Marion. He was a very prominent figure during the Revolutionary War here in Charleston. The Swamp Fox, absolutely. And the restaurant in there is called the Swamp Fox Room. I can remember my parents going to eat at the Swamp Fox Room when I was little. We'd always have to have a babysitter. But you can see John C. Calhoun's statue over there, and we're going to be turning right here onto Calhoun Street. So get in just as close as you can, please. Okay, can everybody hear me back in there? Okay, just scoot on in a little bit. Okay, looking out this direction where the 2 rivers converge, this is the Ashley behind me, and that's the Cooper over there. Where the 2 rivers converge, you're looking at Charleston Harbor, and as I said before, the 2 rivers come together to form the ocean. That's what we Charlestonians think anyway. But right at the center there, at the entrance to the harbor, is Fort Sumter. And Fort Sumter was built just about finished by 1860, and the state of South Carolina seceded from the Union in December of 1860. 4 months later, in April of 1861, by then 7 states had come together to form a confederacy. Several other states joined later with a total of 11. But in any event, in April of 1861, there was a president of the confederacy of the southern states, and the Army presence that was out there was Union presence because it was supposed to have been a U.S. Army fort. Well, President Jefferson Davis of the Confederacy says, what are we doing in the Confederacy with an Army fort? Those folks need to leave, and that's going to now become a Confederate fortification. So warning is given to the Union soldiers out there. They say, sorry, but we can't take our orders from your commander-in-chief. We have to take them from President Lincoln, who is our commander-in-chief. And so with that, commencement began firing on Fort Sumter by Confederate troops, okay, to oust the Union. It took a day and a half before the Union forces gave up, they surrendered. They were allowed to leave, and as far as the Charlestonians were concerned, the war was finished. Took a day and a half, that's all it took. They thought they'd won the war. Well, we know better, that didn't exactly turn out that way. 2 years later, the Confederates, of course, have now got this fort. They've had it since day one, and this is now a Confederate fort. Well, the Union comes back, after fighting lots of battles in other places. They come back, they have a couple of skirmishes over here on James Island, and they decide that they are going to take back Fort Sumter. They try, but the Confederates will not give it up. Finally, the Union plants, just to the right of Fort Sumter is an island called Morris Island. The Union plants a contingent of black troops from Massachusetts, known as the 54th Massachusetts Colored Volunteers, as they were called in those days. This was depicted in a movie called Glory, if anybody saw that movie. It's very, very good. It's very true to actuality. Of course, a lot of embellishments to it, too. But in any event, Robert Gould Shaw, their white officer, he was one of the first, and they were some of the first black soldiers ever to serve the U.S. Army. They were successful in taking that island from the Confederacy. From there, then they tried to take Fort Sumter. They still couldn't get Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter had kind of become something of a statement to the Confederacy. It was the first fort that the Confederates had taken, and they weren't giving it up. So from there, then the Union begins from Morris Island shelling the city. Now this is the island that the black soldiers had taken just to the right of Fort Sumter. That's a distance of 4.5 miles. The Union has some pretty big guns that can propel these projectiles 4.5 miles into the city. So all this area out here is pretty well damaged during the next year and a half. Finally, the war continues to go, against the Confederacy, and the Confederacy figures, the troops locally figure they're not going to win anyway. They may as well just leave, so they abandon Fort Sumter, they abandon all their other fortresses in the area, and they leave the city. And with that, then the city was now in the hands of the Union. Okay. They stayed here for the next 12 years, which was a period known as Reconstruction. This was under military rule during that time. There were very few people who had held office prior to that allowed to stay in office. New elections were held, and as I say, there was pretty much military or martial law, as they call it, during that time. If you're interested in learning more about the Civil War in Charleston, I have written a book about the Civil War here. I've written a book about the Revolutionary War here. I happen to have a few of them with me. If anybody's interested in buying one, they're $10 a piece. They also sell them. If you go into that little shop that I pointed out to you earlier, you can pick up a copy. But they have hundreds of photographs of the buildings in the city as they look today. And what a lot of people do is they use the book and they walk around the city and they read the story of the war, or you can read it at home just by reading it and then knowing those are the houses that you'd be passing by. So anyway, that's a condensed version. There's lots more history where the Civil War came from. But remember, more history from the Revolutionary War than from the Civil War. Okay, any questions? Okay, well we will all, if y'all